right, welcome to the continuing Spring 2014 Center for Secure and Dependable Systems seminar series. Today we have a guest speaker, Dennis Haltinner, who's CIO of Party Light, online retailer, and he's going to talk to us about some real-world issues that they deal with instead of the academic stuff that I always talk about. So we'll hand it over to Dennis. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Jim. My name is Dennis Haltinner, and I am the CIO at Party Light. Party Light is a direct sales and online retailer, primarily out of Europe. We do about $200 million in the U.S., but primary business is in Europe. Most of my experience has been in retail and consumer sales during the 30 years of my IT background. And I grew up in the days where we had the IBM mainframe computer with 3270 terminals attached to it. And we worried about security, was really worried about what was attached. So if you weren't attached to the computer, it wasn't much to worry about. So things have changed a lot. And during my presentation, I'm going to talk about some facts and share them with you, and I'm going to have some opinions. And I wanted you to realize that the opinions are mine. I don't necessarily share the same view as everyone in my company or my colleagues, certainly not as my friends and family. Jim, in his first presentation, talked a lot about how we're constantly being bombarded with all these news articles about cyber threats and cyber breaches. And they keep on coming, and every week we see more and more. And as he mentioned, we are under attack. And I firmly believe that is right. We are under attack. And it's easy to pass it off as what we call FUD. Does everybody know what FUD is? Fear, uncertainty, and doubt. It's how you sell anything in the computer industry. It's easy to pass that off, but the more you think about it, and then this is just one example, of fairly senior people saying this is something real, and I tend to believe it is something real. It's of the same ilk, if you will, of mafia and drug cartels. Cybersecurity is that impactful to our economy and to our freedom. We are behind. I'm going to share with you a number of observations, what I'll call from the front line, because that's where we are. We're on the front line, where we deal with consumer privacy and consumer credit card security all the time. There's been rapid changes in technology that are really making it harder to stay secure. We're not moving as fast. Traditional security tools that we've been relying on for decades are starting to prove very ineffective. And there's a lot of conflicting interest. Security at what cost? I'll talk about it. But the retailer is not necessarily motivated to be the most secure. And then I want to talk about some wish list, some things that I see on the horizon or wish would come that I think can make a real difference in the battle. First of all, the technology change. Remember, I talked about being the IBM mainframe, and we had these 3270 terminals connected. I didn't worry about anything but the perimeter. I worried about the cables. If you didn't have physical access to the terminal, you couldn't get into my computer. So everything was secure. It was all about protecting physical access. PCs came around in the early 80s, and we had modems, and we started worrying a little bit because now there was another way to access, but still it was very controlled. I could focus on those specific points of vulnerability and still felt pretty secure. Then about 20 years ago came this thing called the internet. And ever since then, the world has changed dramatically when it comes to IT security, particularly in the retail and consumer goods. If I look at total users of the internet over the last 10 years, it's grown by about 500%. And something happened in 2007. Does anybody know what that is? This is a conversation, I was told. This isn't it.
The iPhone.
Exactly. The iPhone came in 2007. And it really changed the whole world when it came to online computing. If I look at the mobile world, 2/3 of all adults use a mobile device to connect to the internet. But when they do that, they've introduced a lot of threats. 31% of adults have received a text message that say, call this number or hit this link. 35% of adults say, well, I've lost my cell phone, so we don't know where it is anymore. And I saw this statistic the night before I came when I lived in Boston, and it was on the news that the New York police said 40% of all robberies are about the cell phone. They want the phone. Another technology that's really changed things is what I call unsecured Wi-Fi. We have Starbucks, we have airports, we have airplanes now where I can get in Wi-Fi. 2/3 of all adults access their social network or email on unsecured Wi-Fi. 24% access their bank accounts. 31% shop online. Even though they know the dangers. And recently it was just made public with the man-in-the-middle attack with iPhones and iPads. All happens on an unsecured network. In the last 3 or 4 years, one of the biggest things to impact me is what they call BYOD. Anybody want to tell me what that is?
Bring your own device.
Bring your own device. 3 or 4 years ago, this was never allowed. Now, 89% of IT departments in business support some form of BYOD. The most common is cell phones. We let you bring your cell phone, your smartphone, into the organization so you can get corporate email, access certain information. And 69% of executives think this is a really good idea. We're saving money. The employees are happier. Reality is, though, when I bring mobile, tie it to unsecured, and then bring it in to my corporation, past my perimeters, I've really lost control. So there's unknown third-party apps. Where is the company data? Who took it at Starbucks? Where is that data? And most concerning to me is the disgruntled employee who now has access to all this data. Before it was, I knew where the data was. I no longer know where the data is. I no longer know what data they have. Okay, quiz time. It's trivia. Steve Jobs just returned in 2000. This was 1997, I believe. Yeah. As it's Apple's new leader. It was in deep financial trouble. What major company bailed them out with a $150 million investment? They pretty much saved Apple. Microsoft, yes. As ironic as that is, does anybody know the reason why?
Trust law or something like that?
No, it was actually, they were in a war with Netscape for the #1 browser. And it was a deal to get Windows IE on the Macs. So for 5 years, Safari wasn't on the Macs, it was actually Internet Explorer. Interesting bit of trivia. Another technology that's really changing the way we secure our environments or think about security is cloud computing. Gartner, a leading IT research firm, for the last 4 years, cloud computing has been the only item on the CIO agenda that's been there all 4 years. I had to make a presentation for our board of directors, and they wanted to know what cloud computing was. So I could talk about public clouds and private clouds and platform as a service and infrastructure as a service and software as a service. So I tried to put it in a little different context. I said, think about software in these 3 categories. It's something I built. Yeah, I write the code. It's something I do myself. It's something I buy. I may modify it, but I buy it and I install it. Or it's something I just use. And I said, each one of those in our environment has a place. I'm going to do custom development for things that add unique capabilities or bring competitive advantage. Something that makes me unique or gives unique value. That tends to be large development projects, large in-house staff, and it's going to be slow and costly to change or update. But there's a place for it. There's certain things that we need to do that for. As far as package solutions, they're best used when I have an integrated core business process that's highly configurable. We tend to think of ERP. as a good example. I can't possibly write all that. And there's not a lot of competitive advantage in how I process orders once they enter my building. But there are a lot of uniquenesses about I make candles. So it's unique. I need certain things different than another company. So it's highly configurable, less development. It's a mix of in-house and a vendor staff. And its speed and cost to update and change is really based on how much I have to change that. And the third category is things that are just common usage, limited uniqueness or configuration. Email is a good example, where there's no development. Software is pretty much taken as is, and it's really pretty fast to change, replace, and update. We had group-wise at our company in 2 weeks. We moved to Exchange in the cloud, and it was no big deal. It was pretty easy. And so the way I defined it was, if you're in that upper quadrant, you're in the cloud. So if I didn't write the code and it's not in my data center, let's just think about that as the cloud. So that's the way we have sort of defined it, at least in non-technical terms, with most of the people we deal with. And the reason that is important is because there's a lot of business incentive for us to go there. We find that customer development is inflexible. There's high capital investment. And there's a big push in industry today to reduce the amount of capital we use. We require a lot of specialists on staff to manage that custom development. It's very resource intensive. We buy and build for the peak, and we focus is really on the IT utility and operations. And by moving to the cloud, we become flexible, scalable. I really can be like the big guys. I can do the same things they can do. I have to make limited capital investment. I can pay for the drink, so to speak. I can rent the specialists when I need them. I buy what I need when I need it. During Christmas, I increase my capacity. In January, I decrease it. And my focus is on delivering service to the business. So back when I started in 2011, this is our portfolio. And we had a fairly tight perimeter. We could really look and say, I knew. I was doing some FTP, and I was doing some real-time IP integration, but for the most part, I knew where my data was. It was in my data center, and I could control it. And we've been on this push, and this is where we are today. I'm going to give you just a little example of how that happened. I'm entering an order, and there was 26 actually different vendors involved or pieces of software running outside of my control. I just picked the highlights. But right now, our e-commerce platform is software as a service. And so it's external to our data center. And they actually use Amazon Web Service as their hosted environment. I use eDialog for all my email campaigns. I link to Limelight to host my content so I get better performance from around the country, around the world. I use a firm called PM Digital that integrates with my sites so I can do targeted advertising and optimization of marketing and search engines. I use Site Catalyst so I can create automatic campaigns based on where you click and what you do. I know where you're going. I use Bazaar Voice so I get feedback on what you like this product, what you don't like of this product. I use ZMags, which gives me a different interface, a catalog type. I want to romance the customer sometimes. Some want to go shopping, some want to be romanced. So it gives me another platform, another way to engage my customer. Sales tax, I use a firm called Vertex that helps me with sales tax around the world, so I don't have to maintain that and keep it up to date. Payment providers, be it for the bank or for credit cards, I go directly to payment providers integrated with my online transaction. All of this is happening when I hit submit my cart. FedEx and UPS I integrate to get shipping options and schedule delivery. AppNet and Gomez I use. I have links on the server so that I can get performance of all the different integration steps so I know how things are happening. All of these create areas of vulnerability in my online transaction that 4 years ago didn't exist. So my ability to manage the perimeter is paramount, but I'm losing the battle. What's going to happen in 2017 when I no longer have anything in my data center? It's a bit like playing a game of Risk. Anybody play Risk? I love the game. I always went for Australia because it was easy to protect the perimeter. The reward was only 2, but it was easy to do. The cloud is like this. The cloud's trying to protect Asia. The reward is much, much higher, but it's much harder to protect. So protecting the perimeter is not really a sufficient strategy. I have lack of visibility. I'm relying on someone else that I don't necessarily have control of. It's a shared infrastructure and networks, so it's much more complex to run. We never designed interfaces when I was growing up to be secure. We designed them to be efficient. We just trusted everybody. If you were inside my perimeter, well, you must be okay. I never had to verify that. And now when I'm in the cloud, all my interfaces and APIs are open to attack, but they've never been trained to be, if you will, secure. And data protection in motion. We encrypt credit cards. Everybody encrypts credit cards. Target breach had nothing to do with encrypting credit cards. They captured the information that was in memory before it was encrypted. So now we have to worry about data in motion. When it was in my data center, I never had to worry about those things. I want to talk a little bit about some of the tools we've been using to manage security in the past and what I think some of the limitations are. First, passwords. Passwords, I have no idea when they started. I know for certain they've been around for at least 2,000 years. Because the Roman army used to use them every day. They'd have a new password of the day. So if you tried to get another camp, there's always a password, and you had to know your password. Alibaba, what's the famous password?
Open Sesame.
Open Sesame.
Not a good one anymore.
Okay. Shakespeare. Does anybody know? King Lear, first line. Long live the king. And there was a password throughout the play. So passwords have been around for a long, long time. The first computer password was developed in the early 1960s. Most historians agree with this. At MIT, they had a shared computing infrastructure, and you could get 4 hours block of time. And I don't even think they had IDs. This is your password, and you would sign in. One bright, engaging student said, this isn't enough time for me. So he asked the computer to print out all the passwords so he could use another one. So that was the first password theft in 1962. Passwords are easily stolen, guessed, and phished. The most common password in the world is password 1. Compliance. Yeah, I come from an industry, we try to be secure. I live in the state of Massachusetts. Massachusetts has its own privacy law. So everything I do, we have to make sure it abides by that privacy law. I use credit cards. That means I have to abide by PCI. Here is PCI's list of things I need to do. What I have to do to every firewall, what protections and viruses I have to run. It's all documented. I can go on and I have HIPAA for any health care for my employees. I have SOX for all financial controls. I have Internet Audit that has its own set of compliance controls. COBIT, which is a normal industry standard for IT. I go on and on and on, and it becomes very, very complex and very difficult to deal with all the various regulations, all trying to make me secure. But reality is compliance does not equal security. 75% of the companies that had credit card breaches last year were compliant. If the primary goal is compliance, we're simply making our adversary, we're giving them our playbook. So we give them this, you know what I'm going to do, how I'm going to protect my firewalls. Oh, and I'll make it easy for you. I'll put it in a book, and I'll let you go buy it. So we've pretty much given our adversaries, they know exactly what we're going to do. They know our defense. We've given them our playbook. Another common tool is firewalls. Nothing wrong with firewalls. It's a basic way to protect anything that's on the other side. The problem is they're very difficult to navigate. What should and should go through. They tend to stop the wrong things and allow the wrong things. There's a high rate of human error. And virus protection. It's great for the history, the things that have been there. But new viruses coming out, 80% aren't found by virus protection, at least the first few months. So the most vulnerable, the most critical vulnerabilities, it's not going to stop. And the problem with today's tools in my industry, the front end, is they're all focused on preventing what people have attacked in the past. And our adversaries are out there looking at what can I do in the future. Give you another example. iPhone, we said, was introduced in June 2007. By July 2007, there was a jailbreak for it. Now I want to talk a little bit about the economics, if you will, of security in consumer and retail. It's security at what cost? These are two figures I got out of some recent research. Most people have said that 1 trillion is not really appropriate because it talks about all these indirect costs and cost to society and lost opportunity cost. Most people say the real direct costs are about $100 billion, $113 billion. And so in any case, it's a big, big, big number. That's a lot of money. We do know it's growing. Successful attacks in 2013, 18%. Now what we did is we looked within a company, within a business. So within the retail and consumer sector, we know that successful attacks have gone up 18%. And again, in consumer and retail, we recognize the cost of those was about 26%. We also know that revenue from these attacks is really just a fraction of what the cost is. The botnet that generates 1/3 of spam email generated $2.7 million for its owners, if you will, in 2013. We annually spend $1 billion to protect ourselves from that. Even more interesting, the credit card business. Stolen credit card you can buy online, depending on its value, between $2 and about $30. And the half-life of a credit card is about a month. Because the older it gets, the less value it is. The impact to the company for every credit card stolen is well over $500. That doesn't even include the reputation that the company suffers when they have. Just think of the impact to Target. But thinking about the impact to Target, it's usually not permanent. Just last week, Target announced their earnings and said, oh, by the way, that breach we had, we're getting our customers back. We're rebounding. So even though it was dramatic impact and hurt them for a quarter, it doesn't seem to have a long-term impact. Another surprising thing to me, at least, was, we talk about the revenue being small and the cost, the impact to companies like mine, pretty high. But the cost to defend actually greatly exceeds even the cost of the impact. Give you specifics again from the consumer and retail business. The average consumer retail company spent $3.6 million to protect themselves in 2013. If I average all the breaches across those companies in 2013, the average is about 1.9 million. So there is a cost-risk trade-off. When we think about investing more, well, all you have to do is make these more investments. It's not necessarily cost-beneficial for the company. And so I try to lay out a demand curve, trying to say where we are over the last 3 years. Most experts say that best we can achieve, if we did everything the way it's supposed to, best we can achieve is 95%. That would cost 9 to 10 times our spending to get to that level. Beyond just the financial aspects, there's an impact to convenience. too much verification is going to cause inefficiencies at the store, which have some real bottom line impact. And for an online retailer like me, that means you're going to abandon your cart, and I'm not going to get the sale at all. In 2001, to give you an example, Target actually launched a chip-based credit card. And they took it away in 2004 because it added a few seconds to every transaction, and they made the checkout process inefficient. They were much more concerned about the efficiency than the security. The other problem we have is there's much more value in collecting the information than protecting it. Another example, Target. I have some good friends at Target. That's where I got these statistics. They had the ability to accurately predict, based on what you bought over the last few months, that you were pregnant and when your due date was. So using that information, coupons at checkout, all sorts of things, emails, the information they gather through that checkout process is enormously valuable to them. Give you an example. If you look at the lifetime value of an email address, so if you're a customer of mine and I have your email address, that's worth almost $18 to me. Does anybody know what a Facebook like is worth? On average for a retail customer? $174. And some brands like Levi's, it was up to $400. But on average to the retail industry, it's just an enormous value we get from the integration of that data. So I want to talk a little bit during our time remaining about what I call the reinforcements. You know, things I wish, things that are underway, that are really going to happen, and things that I wish would happen. And hopefully you're here to make all those dreams come true. First, chip-based cards. Does anybody know what the chip-based card is about? Okay, it's a credit card that has a chip in it, so it generates a one-time use for the transaction. What does EMV stand for? Anybody know? You're failing the quizzes. EuroPay, MasterCard, and Visa. So those are the three that came together, the standards in early 2001. Came up with the standard for the chip. It was introduced in Europe, and immediately there was a 34% reduction in credit card fraud in the UK. That's all credit card present, card not present. So just the fact that it was in the marketplace dramatically decreased the cost. Its deployment is underway in the US mid-2015. Why was it so slow? It was going to cost industry about $10 billion to implement. And they're all about, when do I get my cost back? It's all about that trade-off. When is the right time? It reduces compliance cost. So I showed you my PCI compliance. About a third of this goes away when I do EMV. Because Visa has said if you're using EMV cards, you don't have to do this part anymore. So it's going to reduce costs for the retailer as well. Another one not so far advanced, but making rapid improvements is mobile device payments. So I have near field communication. I have my cell phone in my pocket, I can walk out and it automatically charges my bill. A little space age, but it's on the way. I think closer is an EMV equivalent tool where it'll generate a one-time use that I can use either through a scanner or through text entry. What about online? Because again, in security, I always learned, and you're much more expert than me, that there's three things, and you need at least two of them. One is what you know, who you are, or what you have. So if you can meet two of those criteria, you're secure. Problem is today it's all about what you know. It's about passwords, pins, so there's some security loss. What EMV does is, it's what I have. I have to have the device. I have to have that card. Very hard to replicate, very costly. And I have to know something. I have to know a PIN. So we're trying to capture those two elements. When you're online at home, how do you do that? How do I prove to you through a computer screen that I have the card? And that's what these chip authorization programs are about. Little devices you can get that you put your card into, and it will generate a one-time use code that you can use online that verifies that you actually have it. And there's computer apps that they're thinking about putting on phones that would do the exact same thing. So I can create that equivalent of having something on an online transaction and provide the same kind of security. That's a few years off, but it's certainly coming. And there's something that is real today, and we're moving rapidly to it, is I'm never going to store a credit card again. Right now, about 90% of my credit cards I never see. Because of the way we've worked with our payment providers, they're gone. I tokenize, so I only get a token. And soon we're moving to an environment that my payment provider is going to be integral to my checkout process. When it's time to do payment, I go to their site. I never see it. I'm not involved in that transaction. I get my payment from the payment provider, they get it from the customer, and it takes the retailer out of it. And it makes the payment provider, who is much more capable of providing security, puts them on the front line and protects me. I see more and more of that happening, and within a year, we're going to be at least in that environment in my company. So none of these eliminate the threat, but all of these, I think, will significantly increase the cost and difficulty for criminals to comply. And once we can change that cost-benefit relationship, I can see some progress in the war. Another one that is working today, and I think will continue to get better and better, is big data. Already I get challenge and response. If I log in from multiple different locations, they always ask me my security questions. Buying unusual items, I'll get a call from Discover saying, did you really make this purchase? If I have different IP address on my computer, they're going to challenge and response, want a security question. Overseas, again, I'll get the call. Billing address, shipping address, all this data about what I tend to buy, where I tend to buy, it's creating really good fraud screening. And I expect to see it gets even better at that and more accurate to help protect the consumer and the company. Another thing I'm wishing for is harmonizing the compliance. If we can reconcile all these overlapping everybody has right motivation, but get us down to something, one standard that we can all work with, or at least help reduce some of the overlapping, and getting our software hosting vendors to work with those compliance agencies. We don't design software today with security. We add it in at the end. We need to design software with security in mind. And that's what I think the compliance has to be about. And I think that will reduce the overhead, at least on my team, by at least 50%, and I think improve security and privacy. Another tool, I think, for our war is focus on what's really important. Security incidents, they're business risks. They're always going to be there. Perimeter defense is not 100% effective. So I need to really prioritize what information is important. And I need to really focus on that information. Not that I don't want to protect everything, but some things, the crown jewels, really need to be protected. And we need strategies that focus more on that than on trying to protect the perimeter. And finally, I think the most powerful weapon we have is empowering the individual. If people are trained, they're informed, and they're cautious about what they do, when they really think about what they do, I think it really improves their ability to be secure. I would love to see a little more tools, to help them manage it. Like I'd love to be able to change the security card on my the back three numbers on your credit card, things that you can't do. I think we want to empower the consumer to take more control of their security. But at the end of the day, they are the front line. And a consumer that's knowledgeable and knows what to do and what not to do, I think is the best defense. So with that, I got about 4 minutes left for questions, 14 minutes left for questions. Yes?
So I did an analysis back in 2010 for the DoD about point-of-sale authentication mechanisms.
Yeah.
And the United States was way behind European countries and Far East countries. They had two-factor point-of-sale authentication implemented as far ago as 2008. So America's lagging. Is it
Yes.
the American consumer that's reluctant, or the American retailer, or is this a cultural thing?
There probably is some cultural aspect to it. I do think it is the retailer because, I was trying to point out that there's so many costs associated with migrating to that environment, and the value traditionally hasn't been there. It's only in the last few years we've seen this steady increase in the instances of cybercrime, and I think it's woken up the American retail and American credit card payment industry to saying something has to be done. Like I
So,
said,
a
to
follow-up.
convert just the credit cards is about $10 to $20 billion cost. And to do that, where was my payback? That was part of the question.
So the follow-up question is, have we hit that critical point where they've lost enough dollars to do something about it, or do we have to lose more?
I think we not only hit that point, but I think it's become so much more aware to the consumer that they're much more cautious and looking for those solutions. And I think that's what's really driving the change. Target announced that they're going to move to it much more rapidly than they had originally planned. And I think sometime in the next few months, we're going to start seeing Target cards come with chip and PIN. So I really think it's the visibility that all these breaches have made that the consumer is now starting to push the retailer into providing higher security.
Thank you.
It's a very good question. Yeah.
So I had a question. You said, because you do online business,
Yeah.
you said online business might start moving towards a payment provider as authenticating all the purchases. Wouldn't that just create a concentrated focus for attackers to actually steal a larger database of credit cards or debit cards?
Well, yeah, the database already exists. So Payment Tech is an example where a lot of people, Chase Payment Tech, where a lot of different retailers will use them to process through Visa and MasterCard the payments. So I use them today. It's just I capture the credit card information and then I send it to them. So they already have that store, if you will, and they are a prime target. So if somebody wanted all the world's credit cards, that's where you'd go to get it. They have that information. So what we're trying to do is, rather than have the retailers and have all these front lines having those credit cards, to put it in some place where it's like the Fort Knox, if you will, of credit cards. The security and the controls, they can invest in that because they're doing it for everybody. But you're right, it does centralize some of those points of attack, but it's already been centralized. It's just I replicate that outside, and this way I wouldn't have to. Yeah.
So I've got two very different questions.
Sure.
I'll start with the first one. I'm looking at your chart where you're showing, the revenue for the attacker, the cost to the business, basically the loss, I assume, per
Yes.
attack, and the cost
Well,
for defense.
detection and recovery, yeah.
Yes. And, I could see a CFO or everything looking at it and said, wait a minute, we are spending a lot more on defense than it would cost us per attack.
Right.
How do you make the argument to them that, yes, that is true, but if we did nothing on defense, the cost of the attacks goes way up because we haven't protected ourselves from anything?
Right.
What type of data do you show them to convince the CFO we're spending at least as much as we need to? We need to spend more, but we're spending at least as much as we need to. Don't cut my budget.
Right. The chart I'm going to show up is what I would use. This is data we collected and information we have from history. So we know if we didn't, from companies that don't have as much security, that, the breaches are much higher. The companies that have more security, the breaches are much lower. And it helps us sort of build that, if you will, from an economic standpoint, that demand curve that says more investment in security gives me this return, less investment gives me this risk. So we want to stay, from a retailer standpoint, I want to be in the knee of the curve. I don't want to spend more than I'm going to get dollar back, and I don't want to spend less than I'm going to lose. if that makes any sense.
Yeah, no, it makes a lot
That
of sense.
square up there is the knee of the curve?
That is right where we are today. So I looked at overall the industry, for example, and if you assume $120 billion in loss, Gartner said that $60 billion is spent purely on software for security prevention. And we know that software is about a third of the budget for most IT organizations. So I calculated that out to be about $180 billion in total would be spent versus $120 billion in loss. So that's where we are today on the curve.
And then the other question,
Yeah.
completely different. So you're mentioning about Target knowing like if somebody was pregnant, and I know
Yeah.
that came off of a news story
Yeah,
where the 16-year-old girl was started receiving coupons or mailings from Target about having a baby, and the parents
Yes.
got really incensed. How dare you send this stuff to our 16-year-old
Right,
girl?
right.
You know, about having a baby? Are you know? And
Yeah.
the parents didn't know she was pregnant.
right, exactly.
But Target did
Yes,
because of what she was buying.
right.
Obviously, there's pushback due to privacy issues there and concerns with the things the big data can give the retailer and what the customers want. How do you balance that in your decisions of what you do and how you use that data for marketing?
Yeah, I mean,
Your daughter's very interested in this answer.
and I explained to her last night, it was, I keep on getting these ads on my screen for Christian Mingle, and I'm not quite sure why. You know, I've been married happily I've been married for 30 years, so happily married for 37 years. You know, it's just, so what site did I go to? Where did I initiate this? And so those kind of things happen. To date, the value of those additional contacts has far outweighed the negative that we've seen. But I do agree with you. I think it's going to turn around someday that people are going to be more concerned about the privacy. You know, we allow people to log into our online shopping through Facebook. We want them to log in through Facebook because that opens us to a lot more information. We want them to share their links because, again, it opens up, now I know their friends and I know. So we are I wouldn't say dishonest in that regard, but we certainly take advantage of whatever information the consumer makes available. The pushback to date has not been so severe. Of course, I sell candles, and other people may sell other things, but it's been fairly lucrative. If that makes any sense.
Yes, it does.
Okay.
So right now you're not balancing too much.
We're not balancing. I'm being very honest.
So you say that the vendors actually push away some of these possible solutions. So what is different than in Europe? Because in Europe, for example, the chip was accepted years and years ago. The shopping habits are much more conservative there. Is this a cultural thing? Is it the legislation? I mean, do they have laws that dictate that? Or where are we falling behind?
Yeah, I think you're right. I think the last point has a lot to do with it. I think privacy laws in Europe and security laws are much stricter. I said the protection of the consumer is much greater, and I think the whole culture was much quicker to adapt. And the fact that it was very successful there is one of the reasons I think it's going to make inroads in the U.S. But there certainly was no government push. The industry was not going to push in and of itself because of the cost of change. And again, as I was pointing out, the value of the information they were getting exceeded the cost of the crime. So there wasn't a lot of incentive. One of the problems when Target introduced this in 2001 is they started losing information. Because right now when you scan the card, they get a whole lot of information about you. And they can quickly tie to your email address and those kind of things. When they were doing the chip and pin, they were just getting a token that said they were losing their connection to the data. And that was so much more valuable to them, plus the inconvenience at the checkout, they decided that the value of that information precedes the value of the security.
So going back, Steve, you just said you got a token for every purchase.
Yeah.
How easy would it be to fraudulently take that token and then remake a purchase with it using your own system?
Tokens one-time use only.
Okay.
So that's the same thing as a chip and pin, if you will, but we generate it behind the scene.
Any other questions? Well, thank you.